morning, you're watching Business World Live. I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day Friday. As widely expected, the Bangko Sentral keeps interest rates at record lows. The central bank says it's ready to rate hikes if inflation accelerates in the coming months.
The Philippines now has almost 20 investment leads in key sectors following the signing of the measure that allows full foreign ownership in telcos, airways, and other major services.
Globe and Union Bank have entered into a partnership to crack down on scammers.
And the government is urged to reassess the Pasig River Expressway project due to its environmental impacts. We begin our broadcast with the Bangko Sentral keeping benchmark rates at record lows.
Now that's despite increasing pressure on the BSP to tighten policy due to inflation risks. As widely expected, the Monetary Board left the overnight reverse repurchase rate at an all-time low of 2%. The rate for deposit facility was kept at 1.5%, while lending was retained at 2.5%. These rates serve as the benchmark for banks and lending companies for the pricing of their loan products and services. BSP Governor Ben Jokno said the board decided to maintain its loose monetary stance in order to safeguard the momentum of economic recovery. At the same time, Jokno said they can pursue monetary action if inflation remains upwards in the coming months. The BSP now expects inflation to hit 4.3% this year, higher than its initial target of 3.7%. The central bank says the adjusted inflation outlook is due mainly to uncertainties in the global crude market brought by the Russia-Ukraine war.
Inflation is likely to remain elevated in the coming months, due mainly to domestic and global supply-side pressures. Under these circumstances, it is still best to address these inflationary pressures through direct, non-monetary intervention. At the same time, however, the BSP is prepared to act as necessary should we see stronger indications of second-round effects, such as when there are already broad-based price pressures and inflation expectations become disanchored.
Now, the Trade Department said the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership could serve to counteract growing calls for protectionism. Thus, the agency says the country's participation in the deal remains a top priority. Several factors have convinced other nations to adopt a protectionist stance at the moment. These factors include the ongoing pandemic and the scarcity of resources resulting from the war in Ukraine. The DTI said RCEP offers a stable and predictable business environment amid all of these uncertainties. At the very least, Trade Secretary Mon Lopez said the agreement will keep trade and investment levels high. Lopez is hopeful that the Senate will ratify the RCEP soon. Now recall that the chamber went on an election break last month without ratifying the deal.
Now, business chambers expect the amendments to the Public Service Act to enhance competition and attract more foreign investments. The chambers believe that foreign players will help modernize industries such as telecommunications, shipping, railways, and subways. It added that increased competition will ultimately result in improved operations and competitive pricing for such services. Bloomberg reports that as of now, the Philippines has about 19 investment leads after President Duterte signed the amendments to the law, which essentially allows full foreign ownership in key services such as telcos, airport, domestic shipping, and expressways. Trade Secretary Mon Lopez said the initial potential investment for these steps could be more than $70 billion and could grow by as much as $100 billion over 2 years. Now, are any of those investment leads from Europe, and are we drumming up much interest from investors in the region? Let's find out from Lars Wittig from the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines. Good morning, Lars. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, so you have the Board of Investment saying that there are at least 19 leads here after the amendments to the PSA was signed by the President. Do we have any information on whether some of these leads are from Europe, or if not, are there at least any inquiries from the region, and which sector or industry are they most interested in?
Well, first of all, I would really like to thank the President, his administration, and the many members of Congress who have worked so hard to pass this bill. This is a landmark bill. It is. We believe it is the most important bill to grow foreign investments into the Philippines that have been passed in over 30 years. So this is not just a happy Friday, it's a happy week. It was signed Monday, and we were even invited on behalf of the Joint Foreign Chambers. I received the signed bill in person from the President on Monday. Now, your question is which industries or which specific investments and companies can we now expect? Well, we know the areas affected: telco, aviation, shipping, and rails. I think where we immediately will see some big changes, relatively fast anyway, that will be telco. As you may recall, there was the third telco tender only 2 or 3 years ago, but that was of course under the old regulation, max 40% ownership. And we know firsthand about also European telco companies that came to the Philippines to bid. And I know them from my own business with Regis and Spaces. Some of them were holding office with us. So, and many of them, they didn't even bid. They returned without bidding because they couldn't own more than 40%. Hence, it was too much money, too many billions to invest without better control themselves over their own money, their own destiny. We expect several of those to return now. Our American colleagues have also been out advocating or announcing that we should be expecting Elon Musk's Starlink to be coming to the country, be made available to the country. This is very important because that's also addressing the need for inclusive growth, because better internet in the most remote areas is absolutely key. And then I think we should not just focus on who are interested in investing here, but who will also be invited to do so thanks to the new law. Many industries have endured a lot due to COVID-19, and in order to just survive or at least be able to grow and reinvest, they will be seeking foreign capital that they otherwise were prevented to do. And of course, in that regard, I think about the domestic carriers, Philippine Airlines, you have Air Asia in the Philippines, you have Cebu Pacific. I believe that at least 2 of those 3 are very interested in pursuing this access to foreign capital.
Lars, moving closer into what Europe is interested in, to what extent do European investors look at the Philippines compared to the rest of the ASEAN region? What do we have in terms of, competitive advantage, and which ones are our closest competitors, especially when we talk about, pandemic and how we've handled the pandemic, infrastructure, and the ways in which we've been doing business, cost of doing business, ease of doing business here in the Philippines?
Very good question. First of all, Europe is the single largest investor into ASEAN. On an accumulated basis, $350 billion invested by European companies into ASEAN. That's the great part of the story. The sad part is only 4.7% of that has benefited the Philippines. So obviously, especially enabled by these new bills, especially this landmark bill, the Public Service Act amendments, it is now up to us to really make Philippines a focus area. And to put it very simply, I don't have to jump up and down to convince them to look in this direction. As a matter of fact, ASEAN is already the highest, the most preferred investment region globally for European companies. What we have to do at ECCP and the Joint Foreign Chambers, well, especially ECCP, is to gravitate more of these investments towards the Philippines. And I think we are becoming increasingly attractive and increasingly competitive in that regard. There's still a way to go, and there are some specific areas, especially within energy, by the way, sustainable energy, where we need further improvements. But I believe that we can do a lot to grow it. We already saw it. You also asked with reference to how we managed, how the country was managed through the COVID pandemic. We feared that with the highly sustained lockdowns, that we would have a slower bounce back in the Philippines than in the other countries. Luckily, at least I were wrong. The economy grew 5.5% last year. We look like we're having a very quick, rapid bounce back. These bills, these amendments will certainly help it. And then, of course, there are also new external factors that you covered earlier in your news about energy prices, inflation, and other things.
Now, Lars, earlier you mentioned that one of the industry that's been drumming up much support from investors here would have to be the telco space. But that's also where one of the main contentions lie when it comes to the amendments to the PSA. There are concerns on national security. Do you think that the amendments or the law in its newest form has enough safeguards against that?
You are pointing out the exact right focus area for these amendments, because the Public Service Act is only in place in order to protect national security. We are talking in case of a war, for example. And it is not intended to just create protection from competition. Unfortunately, we felt strongly, and obviously the government, Senate, etc., agreed with us that too much was included just for the protectionism itself and not really out of the interest of national security. Obviously, now it is much more realistic as to what is national security and what is not. And besides, many of these things are really being managed and governed by rules and regulations that are also putting other limitations. Let me mention one. In order to be able to now own more than 40% of, say, telco or aviation, shipping or rails, to own 51 or even 100%, you cannot be a government company. It has to be a private enterprise. Very important. I understand the concerns. They've also been raised after Monday when the bill was signed. But there are really good functions, built-in functionalities that still ensures the national security and simply just ensures that we get all of the benefits of better prices and better services for all in the Philippines.
Lars, the elections are coming up. How is the sentiment from European investors looking outside, looking in on what's going on here in the country? We did have, a survey of investors on which was the preferred president for the business community, and that was actually Vice President Leni Robredo. Do you have some same sort of survey that you can share with us? And to what extent does the election outcome impact what you're saying as the interests of European companies in investing here?
I think polls and surveys are very risky to look at. I think we have much better indicators that are telling us whether we should be, how this is affecting the investment environment. Number one, last year, foreign direct investments increased over 50% and was record high at $10.5 billion. Foreign, and that included the acceleration towards the end of the year. So clearly, foreign direct investors are not spooked by the polls and the likelihood of one candidate rather than another. And another very clear indicator is the stock market, which has been very resilient. And the only things that slightly rattle the stock market right now is, again, what was covered earlier in your news this morning, the fuel prices, in particular inflation in general.
Now, Lars, lastly, before we let you go from PSA, we've also talked about the elections. This time, let's talk about the RCEP. That, of course, delayed further by months here as lawmakers go on election break here. How much do we stand to lose here the more that we delay the ratification of our membership in the trade bloc?
Well, it is what it is. There's a lot of countries that have elections coming up right now. So that's not an area it's difficult to assess what are we going to lose by not doing passing certain acts. I think it is more important to say, okay, when we come out on the other side, what is most important? And I'm sure that your data also shows that everybody are really eager to see the continuation of the build. But I would also like to highlight that sustainable energy, and the biggest concern right now for everybody here in the Philippines, all the politicians down to the sari store owner, the jeepney driver, is the increased prices. And it is not just because of Ukraine and Russia, what is going on there. We are normally getting our coal from Indonesia. Indonesia now have export bans. We need to further sustainable energy, and unfortunately, in regards to sustainable energy, we are still not able, it's not possible for foreign companies to go in and to come in and invest in production of sustainable energy, being wind energy or solar energy, with more than 40% ownership. Not allowed, despite all of these new good bills, simply because of the implementation rules and regulations of the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy Act is implemented with regulations that prevent over 40% ownership. And that, we believe, is really holding us back from getting better, greener, and cheaper energy into the Philippines. That's a very easy change, actually, because it's just the way that they've decided to execute laws under these limiting regulations. So that is very high on our agenda when we come out on the other side after the election, along with continued build. With these many amendments, many new bills by the current government, personally, and on behalf of ECCP, very optimistic.
All right, thank you very much again for your insights. Again, Lars Wittig, President of the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines. Now, coming right up after the break, Globe and Union Bank are teaming up to crack down on fraudsters.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
And you're still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
Shares on the rise on the back of the government's 10-point recovery plan, and today markets will digest the expected hold-fire decision of the BSP. Danny at the terminal to give us an update. Dan, last day of the trading week, how are we doing?
All right, Jess. Well, as you mentioned, first of all, happy Friday. But as you mentioned, shares did rise yesterday after, of course, the approval of that EO. There's a 10-point outline there on how we will be recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. And then that was ahead of the hold fire anticipated, of course, by the Bangko Sentral. But as you can see, it does seem that we're paring back a touch. We're down by 0.14%. We are just close to 30 minutes into the trading day. Of course, apart from the BSP's decision, the market is really also reacting to the fact that they have raised the 2022 inflation forecast. That's going to be 4.3% year on year. That's above the target range and, of course, above the 3.7% forecast they had given previously. Now, let's take a quick peek at the movers of the day, Jess. This, of course, as telcos were in focus on the back of PSA amendments. We also have, infrastructure companies because of toll roads as well as airports being open to full foreign ownership here. And a bit of a mixed bag here. You do have, half of them rallying still, like URC and Metro Bank, but we also have the likes of Security Bank, AGI and JG Summit sitting this out. So it's very, very mixed, no clear direction here. But I did want to see some counters to focus on financials, for instance, on the back of these rates still staying low on the green side, as well as the properties going the other side. So down by 0.3%, despite the fact, of course, that the rates are still on record lows. And I just want to have some, okay, now it's not good news anymore, Jess, but just a few minutes ago, it was already in the red. That is, of course, Brent crude prices, again, back up to 119. But of course, yesterday they were hitting, 123 a barrel. So still a little bit of a paring back here. And this, of course, affects one specific stock I want to look at, and that is Mondenisen, which is now trading down by 0.15%. This, as yesterday, they had reported 8.2 billion pesos in core net income in 2021. That's down by 5.4% amid inflation pressures. And this, according to their CEO, Henry Sosanto, last year, 2021, was a transformative year. They did the biggest IPO in Philippine history. But while they had a strong start to the year, they had to deal with the commodity inflation. And he said there's just so much that they can do to hedge this commodity, inflation through supply side initiatives or efficiencies. But there might be a mathematical inevitability that we will need to pass on the cost increases to our consumers. So brace for some cost increases from some products, of course, affected by the global commodity rise, Jess.
Here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. Union Bank and Globe have agreed to team up and share personal information. That's as they try to boost measures against scammers who prey on financial clients. Globe points out that the law allows the disclosure of personal information by a telco firm to a bank to aid fraud investigation. Now, under the deal, Globe and Union Bank will share details including names, addresses, and contact details, and location-based telecommunication activities of suspected scammers. The partnership would allow Union Bank to work with Globe in identifying fraudulent customers who hide behind prepaid mobile numbers.
And this from the Philippine Star. The Public-Private Partnership Center is urging the tourism sector to tap the private sector to help with its recovery from the pandemic. The center says the private sector can play a vital role in infrastructure development for a tourism-led economic recovery. Currently, the country's Public-Private Partnership Program has several tourism projects under implementation. This includes the Rizal Park redevelopment, the agro-industrial and IT parks in UP Los Baños, and the Clark Tieza Tourism Enterprise Zone.
A transport advocacy group is urging the Environment Department to reassess the proposed Pasig River Expressway or PAREX, citing its environmental impact. The move, as one coalition believes the expressway will deliver, quote, little to no benefit while causing significant harm to the environment. The group even described it as a, quote, wrong project for today and tomorrow. Parex is San Miguel Corporation's planned 95 billion peso 6-lane elevated highway, which will traverse Manila, Mandaluyong, Taguig, Makati, and Pasig along the reverse course. Move as One has called on the government to postpone the public hearing on Parex scheduled today. And we're 45 days away from the May 9 polls, and today marks the start of the campaign for local positions. There are over 18,000 posts up for grabs for local candidates, and over 800 of them are unopposed. COMELEC reminds candidates and their supporters that minimum health protocols must still be observed in their sorties and grand rallies. Current COMELEC rules allow in-person campaigning in areas under alert levels 1 and 2, even without a permit from the COMELEC campaign committee. Venue capacity in areas under alert level 2 has also been raised from 50% to 70%, while venues under alert level 1 may be filled up to 100% capacity.
Ay hindi naman po nangangahulugan na tayo magiging isang super spreader o magkakaroon pa tayo ng super spreader event. Napakahirap po yun kasi isipin nyo, pag nagkaroon ng isang super spreader event na naandyan kayo, sa inyo po maisisisi yan.
All right, Dan, days are about to get crazier here with the start of the local campaigning here. If you think campaigns for national elections are crazy, wait till you see our local officials.
I know 45 days na lang, Jess. You know, a lot of pressure is being felt, of course, all around the metro and the country, of course.
And that wraps up our first look into the business day this Friday and this week, March 25, 2022. Join us again Monday next week at 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
Happy Friday, everyone. I'm Dani Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines, especially as you go out into the streets for those rallies and sorties. Keep safe pa rin. We are One News.